quite different to what's discussed in the other annotated bibliography video, in that I'm going to do a bit of a dive into actually writing, or finding the information and writing one of the annotated bibliographies for your assignment. And what I'm going to focus on is actually using a peer-reviewed article to do that with, because I think for some students often that can be quite a daunting thing when you pick up a 20-page peer-reviewed journal article and go, oh my goodness, how am I going to make head nor tail of this to actually complete an annotated bibliography. So I hope that by the end of this session, you'll actually be feeling very comfortable to go and look at peer-reviewed articles for your assignments. I think one of the biggest clues when you're looking at a peer-reviewed article is actually to understand the structure that is underneath most academic writing. And that structure is quite straightforward. There's normally an abstract, which is similar to the executive summary in our assignments. There's then an introduction, which will give you an overview of the topic and often will actually explain to you how the rest of the article is actually structured. So I'll have some signposting there about where to look for different information. Then often there'll be a research problem. And what this is about is setting the scene of the type of inquiry or the area of inquiry that we're trying to contribute to. There'll then be a literature review, and we might come back and talk a little bit more about this. But this is what have other people said about this particular problem. Then there'll be a research question. Which is, given this, what am I going to particularly look at? Then there'll be probably a research method or methodology section. And that's, how am I going to look at this thing that I've pulled out? How am I going to look at this research question? This question. Okay. There'll be some findings, which is what came out of this experiment or this research method that was employed. Then there'll likely be a discussion, which is essentially, so what? And that's often in relation to what others have said and the scene I initially set, and also in terms of the research question. Then there'll be a conclusion, which is wrapping it all up together, as you would probably expect. Now, within the discussion or conclusion section of relevance to the annotated bibliographies is there's often some kind of comment on limitations, which is where the researcher might talk about where they think there might be problems in either their research design, the research method, or in terms of the findings that they've derived. Something else I want to point out at this stage in terms of this structure that underpins most academic articles is that the abstract and introduction will often have very similar information, and as you would expect, often the information that's in these is actually just a summarised version of the rest of this. So if when you start reading an article you think, and you've read this and you get to here and you go, I'm reading the same thing again, well, you probably are, that would make sense. And if you then feel all of this is kind of an extrapolated version of this and this, well, you're right, that's what you would expect to be reading and how you would be expecting to understand it. I also just want to talk about the literature review for a second. This is an area where some students have been stumbling because they've been seeing discussion in this section as being discussion about what this particular article is contributing in terms of findings. So just to recap, A literature review is what the author of this particular study is saying others have said about the domain that they're looking at. Where this can be useful for you in terms of your literature review and why you would still read this is because it can tell you if this is a particularly pertinent article for what you're looking at, they will be drawing on other people who have talked about similar topics. So in the literature review, you might find other similar articles that you actually want to make reference to if you haven't got enough articles yet. So that's where the literature review can be helpful. So what I'm going to do now is actually show you on screen here how I would go through and actually look at an article as I was about to pull it together to write one of the annotated bibliographies. I've spoken to a few students about different ways of doing this. You could actually use a hard copy sheet and you could literally highlight and make notes on the side as you're going. You could actually then cut those sections out and put it into sections on a butcher sheet of paper that you'd labelled with the sections of the assignment, and I'll show you a digital version of that in a moment. So what I'm showing you is digital, but there's actually no reason why you can't do this just by hand if your preferred method is paper and pen for taking notes on things. One thing that I would really strongly recommend is not just highlighting. You should be noting why you're highlighting things, and the reason that the notes that you're making are actually with respect to the sections of your annotated bibliography that the particular highlight is enabling you to answer. What do I mean by that? If you go to the assignment requirement sheet, and I'll just bring this up on screen, you will see that there's quite a few sections in the assignment requirement sheet. So there's a section on focus. You're asked to talk about the focus of the article. You're asked to talk about the research method and the analysis. So that's one section in the assignment. Number two, you're then asked for some reflections, and then you're asked for a justification as to why it's relevant to your particular project. My recommendation is that you have these on your sheet of paper or in a table if you're working electronically as I am. That means that you can then really easily just cut and paste information into those specific areas, which will make it really easy when you come to pull this together. So my recommendation is have that sitting next to you when you're reading through your article. I've got an article here that I have actually already been through and annotated, just to save you having to watch me sit and read. What you'll see here is that I've highlighted this section here and I've given it an F because I've decided to say F means focus. As would make sense given the structure I've just described here, we'd expect in the abstract for the purpose of the paper, what it's exploring, to be clearly stated. And a word like the aim of the research is a big clue that this is focus type of material, so I've highlighted that there. I've then continued through reading, so actually I'm just going to pause and point out these individual sections. So we've got introduction here, as I said, background here. So in this particular article, this is a bit of a combination of the research problem and other sections. And it also then brings in the literature review type information as well into that section there. That's all through there. Sorry, so you can see a lot of superfluous information that, with the exception of if you're looking for other articles, I'm not expecting to see anything here that would actually go into your annotated bibliography. Then we get into here, we're actually talking about research method. So in here, I've actually highlighted the sections relating to the research method. You'll see here, okay. So they've talked about here that they're using a case study for the particular assignment. They've talked about the people who are involved in the particular case. So it's in the Manchester Business School with PhD students. And I'm not going to read that out to you, but there's a lot of information here about the actual research method that's used. I've also put a J in this section. Sorry, I'll come back to there. I've just put a J here because in my mind, when I was looking at this article, I was working on a particular project, and to me, this section here in terms of the groups that they were working with aligned with my case study project. So in terms of them being able to say, this article is relevant, I can actually just say, because of these people that they were engaging with, it was relevant to my particular project that I'm using for my assignment. We've got here a section on the evaluation of results, so that sounds like findings. And here you go, you can see I've highlighted a section here on research findings. And this table down the bottom here is particularly useful in describing the findings of this particular article.
So you can use tables and figures in the bibliography.
I wouldn't see that there'd really be much need for them in an annotated bibliography. But this is a really easy way for you to find out what the article is saying the findings of this particular study were. So if this was relevant, you might say that this particular was a facilitation tool that they were using, was found to be quite high in terms of its usefulness and suitability. So that enables you to quickly pull that information out of there and put it into your assignment. I'm not suggesting that you put that whole thing in your assignment, just that you'd say it was proved useful and suitable by the participants. That's a research finding for this particular article.
Okay.
The other thing was in this particular study, that's why I've highlighted here, there was another little piece on the research method, because not only did they do surveys with the students regarding what they felt of this particular tool, they also actually spoke to a panel of experts about it, and there was some feedback there that they gave, so you might want to talk about that. And then I'll put the research findings from what those people said about it. So when we're talking about those things, we've got the case type work that was done in the research method, and also the talking with the experts, and then there were findings from both of those. As I suggested before, towards the bottom of the article, we've got some talk on limitations. So this might be useful when you're writing the reflection section of your annotated bibliography. In summary, I'm just trying to show you there's actually not that much that it's mentioned plenty of times within this article, these concepts, that you can very quickly pull out the sections that are relevant once you read with this kind of framework in mind about what the structure of the article is. What I would next do, and it really comes down to personal preference, is you could then, these notes that I've made here, say about the focus, is you could copy and paste this directly into your table. That might be another way that students prefer to work sometimes. So you could then also do that for the research method section. The mechanics of how you actually choose to do this is all personal preference. But my strong recommendation is that when you read with those sections of the annotated bibliography in mind, and as you're reading, you're looking for where this article is answering that section